Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast. You're listening to season 1, episode 4, hosted by me, Dani.
And me, Peter.
So what are we talking about this week, Peter?
This week, Dani, we are talking about empathy. And empathy, Dani, it's one word, one small word, but it can be a big subject. So I'll kick things off by asking you a question. Empathy, when it comes to human-centered design thinking, what's your definition of empathy?
Yeah, I think empathy is one of those words that has a lot of meaning for different people as well. The way I like to think about empathy is, for me, it's about perspective taking. And what I mean by that is, can I see a situation from the point of view of somebody completely different from me, or somebody that's in a different place of life than me? And can I do that in multiple ways, right? So is it, can I see a perspective from the view of a 4-year-old, a 40-year-old, a 60-year-old? And can I sit there and kind of hold all those views? What's your perspective of?
Mine is pretty similar in this case, in that when somebody says to me, let's empathize, or often, we'll talk about, let's go and do some empathy work. What immediately springs to mind is, we need to go and understand what it's like to be that other person. And that's going to require different activities for different situations and different people. So I guess it's pretty simple, I think, on the surface at least. Just to, at the end, maybe it's at the end of an empathy. If my intent through a piece of work is to gain empathy with somebody or a group of people, at the end of that piece of work, me and the people I am co-designing with would need to have maybe I was going to say a whole different perspective. Could be a really different perspective to the one that I have on a situation, but we really truly understand what it's like to be that other person. So maybe it depends on how your mind works, but my mind tend to work in pictures. So at the end of that piece of empathy work, I can actually close my eyes and imagine or picture perhaps more strongly and more accurately what it's like to be that person in a particular situation. And I guess that situation and that person is what the group of people we're designing with or for, and I guess the design space that we're exploring initially. That's I think that overlaps with yours. Would you say?
I think so. I think mine is probably more of a theoretical statement, whereas the way you describe your definition is more of a, this is how it looks in practice.
Yeah, okay.
But I think we're saying the same thing.
Nice.
Which isn't always the case with us.
Not always the case. No, maybe this is one where we are kind of aligned, but we have that nice kind of complementary perspective of theory and practical. What are some of the things that let's imagine we're embarking on an opportunity to use design thinking to explore what a potential problem is. What are some things that we could do to gain more empathy for the people we're aiming to design with?
Mm-hmm. I wonder if, for the benefit of our listeners, before we explore that, should we talk a little bit about like why do we need empathy? Why do we use it in design thinking?
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I jumped ahead of us. Imagine that. So yeah, why do we need empathy? Well, this is one of those things. That's a good question. It's making me think, because I think it's kind of ingrained or embedded in me. We need to. It goes back to a couple of our other conversations where we talked about co-designing. That's designing with people, and last week's conversation about humanity-centered design and equity and equality. We need empathy because it's really unusual for us to be exploring problems to solve for using design thinking for groups of people that are exactly the same as us. It's really unusual for it to do that. And actually, a pitfall of any design process is that you assume it's a fundamental pitfall. Don't never assume that everybody else is exactly like you, even if they, might look really similar to you, or you think on the surface they're living a similar lifestyle to you, or any dimension of potential difference. It's a really fundamental error to just assume that somebody else or a group of other people are just like you. I've kind of been a bit abstract with that. What do you think? And do you have any kind of concrete examples of, of that thought or that idea?
So I think empathy is so for me, design work is all about, it's about trying to make things better, right? So in life, we have these pain points that sometimes we call problems. So the work of design is to help to alleviate those pain points and make it a better experience for people. And you can't really alleviate a pain point until you understand what it's like to experience that pain point.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that you have to personally experience it for yourself. I don't think you need that firsthand experience, but you have to be able to at least put yourself in the shoes of someone that is experiencing that pain point so that you can really see what it's like to experience that problem, because that's when you start to see what some of the solutions can be.
Okay. Yeah. And also now you're starting to help me think more clearly, and also empathizing with somebody, I think inevitably leads you to be able to tell stories about that person's situation. So describing their situation in an emotionally engaging way. Usually because whatever problem you're trying to solve is a meaningful problem, but by telling a story about that person, by that you've been able to tell because you're empathizing with that person, actually helps you bring more people in to help you design and solve that problem. I guess I am jumping forward in our kind of design approach, our design process. Inevitably, we need to bring in stakeholders. People can either sponsor the work, or they're going to be funding the work, or they need to buy into the fact that this here is an actual problem to solve. Here is a problem other human beings are experiencing. By telling a story which is emerged from and is based on your efforts to empathize with that group of people, that story is more likely to have people engage in your work and buy into the fact that there is a problem, and therefore support you in whatever way to designing to solve that problem.
An example that I'll share that came to mind is, so I'm left-handed, and in my early days of schooling, I really had trouble writing in lined books.
Mhm.
And I always, got marked down because my handwriting was terrible and I really struggled with writing. Now, if you think about how a notebook is designed, it's designed for right-handed people. You write from left to right. So if you just put your pen right now in your left hand and try to write in a lined notebook, you will see, and for our listeners, you can't see this, but Pete is actually doing this. You'll start to realize that this is not something that was created for left-handed people. So I had two teachers in my early days that really changed my life with this, because one of them asked me, well, why is this such a struggle for you? And they sat with me and saw what I was doing. And so the first teacher suggested, well, what if you started writing using your notebook from the back page to the front page?
Huh.
And it seems really simple, right? But until she sat with me and saw what I was struggling with, she was just marking me down for bad handwriting,
Right.
but we didn't really understand. And the second teacher that changed my life with this was a teacher that said, well, why don't you just get an unruled notebook? Okay. And to this day, my notebooks are unruled notebooks. So I think, but both of those teachers could not have helped me solve that problem had they not sat with me and saw the thing I was struggling with.
Nice. That's a lovely story. And that kind of just encapsulates the whole thing about empathy. You need to be with somebody in some way or another to understand their world, what they're going through. Do you think, well, it's a little bit of a hypothetical question. Let's say do you think they would have come to the same suggestions if you just had a conversation with them? If they had said to you, "Tell me what you're doing, Dani," do you think they had to be sitting next to you to see you in that particular situation?
I think so, because this wasn't the first time that I've struggled with this, and usually teachers will go, well, you really just need to work on your handwriting. And maybe there was some truth to that. I mean, I will own that my handwriting isn't gorgeous. But I think they just made the assumption that, oh, well, Dani's just a sloppy writer, and if we give her this feedback, she'll improve. Yeah, so the teachers before that were operating in that mindset. Mm-hmm. And it was the teacher that sat with me and watched me doing the writing that said, well, what if, and she literally did that. She took my notebook, turned it around and said, well, what if we tried this? Okay. And I think, I don't think that would have happened there needs to be this tangible thing.
Yeah. And what was it like for you when you, how did you feel when, I guess, one, the teachers came and sat next to you, if you can remember this, and then two, the next, the aha moment when you changed where you were writing in the book?
I mean, I don't remember what it felt like in the moment, but I will tell you, obviously it had a life-changing impact on me, because even today I'm doing the thing they taught me, and I'm here telling the story.
True. So it must have been, okay. Case closed on that one. Nice story, Dani. Thanks for sharing. So let's kind of do a quick recap. What we've got to so far: empathy. We've talked about our definitions. You got me thinking about why we might, or why we really should, why empathy is essential for design. And it comes down to, we need to really understand people and the worlds they live in order to define the problem that we're looking to solve, I guess, from their point of view. I also added in, I think it's almost essential, actually, that we empathize so that we can tell appropriately emotive stories that engage people to come and help us in various different ways. Did you have any other thoughts on why we should empathize?
I think another reason we need to be mindful of being empathetic in our solution creating is I think empathy gives us the ability to make sure that we are being inclusive.
Yeah.
Because we all kind of fall into this trap of going through the world based on our assumptions about the world, which are informed by our experiences of the world. And I think when we choose to engage with empathy, it helps us open up our lenses and see it in a different way. Like I shared in my story about being left-handed, if you're right-handed, there's so many things about the world that you just don't see the same way. But until you sit with somebody and you see it differently, then you start to go, oh, well, maybe when I'm creating something, I have to think about, does it work for left-handed people and right-handed people? And that if you think about that concept, that has so many implications for how we work with people who are different from us, right? Whether it's ethnicity, race, culture, age, so many different things. So to me, I think empathy is an enabler for creating inclusive solutions.
Nice. Okay.
So that's my addition.
Nice addition. While you were telling your story about your your left-handed and your amazing teachers, obviously I was listening to the story, but the story that was coming up for me about it's not a story about work that I've done, but it's a really good kind of example, almost an extreme example of somebody embarking on a piece of empathy work, I like the story. It's a story of a designer called Patricia or Patty Moore, and I'll spell that because of my accent. So Moore. Do you know this story, Dani?
Is this the one that dressed like like an elderly woman?
That's right. Now, whoever's listening to this might, I might get some of these facts wrong, but the dates, etc. But Patty Moore, yes, as Dani suggests, she, I think when she was a design student, I think it was either the 70s or maybe the early 80s. I've seen a photograph of her. You can find this on Google. Look up Patty Moore, designer. She embarked on, I think, a year-long project where she would visit different cities in America, basically dressed up as I think she was maybe Patty Moore was in her 20s, but she would dress up as a lady in her 70s, I think she was aiming for. So she went all in. She put a wig on. I think she might have, put makeup on. She wore the clothes of an elderly lady, which, all sounds just like normal kind of dressing up on Halloween. But she also did things like, she put bandages, I think, around her ankles and wrists to reduce her mobility. She wore eyeglasses and had smeared kind of Vaseline over the front of her lenses to reduce her vision. So not only did she dress up like an old person, she actually almost literally tried to embody or be in the body of an old person. And then she would just spend I believe she would spend her days, going around different cities in America and truly understanding what it's like to be an elderly person, both to get around and, as I understand the story, to how she was treated. So one of the aspects of the story that I think I remember correctly sticks out is getting on and off buses was particularly problematic, because she reduced the mobility in her legs. She would struggle to get up and down in and out of the bus, and she would discover that different people would treat her differently depending on who she asked for help. So yeah, that's an extreme example of taking extreme steps to put yourself in the world of somebody else, to empathize with them. As a result of that big long kind of project, she embarked on it as a study of what it's like to be old, and I think that became her, as I understand, that became her focus of design. She realized that getting old, the world wasn't designed for elderly people, and actually it was designed for the average. And we kind of talked about this in one of our other episodes about, you risk designing for averages and therefore designing for nobody, because actually nobody's average. So Patty Moore came to the conclusion that one group of people that the world wasn't designed for at that time was old people, and she took it upon herself to start doing that. And I think, if I've got the story right, eventually things like also good grips and kitchen utensils emerged out of her work, and I'm sure other people. But I think that's for me, it's a really compelling story of how far you can go to empathize with somebody. Maybe I'll turn that around, Dani, and if this is the right time to ask this question, you can tell me if it's not. But at some point, let's talk to our listeners about what are some simple things that people can do to start building empathy for the people that they are hoping to help.
Before we jump into that, I just did want to say I did Google Patty Moore, and your facts are all correct. So this is a real-time fact check. The one correction I'll make to be accurate is that it was in 1979. She was 26 years old. So her research went from the late 70s into the 80s.
Okay, cool.
So there you go.
Thanks, Dani. And thank you, Patty Moore. What amazing work. And thanks for leading the way.
Yes. And I found it amazing that she actually put on prosthetics and really embraced support hose and really went, So coming back to your question about what are some simple things we can do, I think it's important to realize, or, we have to have some boundaries, right? So empathy isn't about pitying people for the things that they're experiencing. And I think that's a real important thing to know. We want to understand what people are going through, what their lives are like, so that we can make them better. But it's not done out of, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's not like I, as a designer, I'm going to show up and make your life better. It's more that we know that there's problems to be solved. And, if I'm passionate about solving a problem and really making a difference, I need to understand who I'm creating those solutions for. So it's done in service. And I think there's a small distinction around that, because I think that when you do try to build empathy, there is a respectful way to do it, and almost a co-design way of doing it. I was thinking of back to our earlier episodes, and the first one in particular. It's empathy has to be has to be a key element of co-design. And maybe as you were talking there, I was thinking, as well as it's in the understanding and also articulating what the problem or even what the need is from the other. Let's just imagine it's one person we're designing with and helping. From their point of view, what is the problem? We can easily fall into the trap of kind of understanding I think we can easily fall into the trap of understanding somebody's situation, but then kind of almost reverting to our own point of view and go, well, that person just needs that, or they just need to do that, or they just need help doing that. But I think that's only one part of the equation. It needs to be that this is the situation from that person's point of view, and what they need that they've articulated to us, or what the need that we've seen is this.
Does that make sense? Does it?
Mm. So I think if I could play that back to you, I think what you're saying is it's step one is to understand it from somebody else's perspective. And then step two is being able to articulate that pain point from the perspective of those. So it's, in other words, it's being able to explain a problem from the perspective of those people that are experiencing the problem and not necessarily you.
Yes, yeah, exactly. If that's not, yeah, exactly. If that's not too complicated, and I guess the reason we can do this is, it sounds a bit strange. The reason we can do this is because we're human beings, and ultimately, or maybe this is a personal belief rather than an ultimate truth. But at our core, there are more similarities than differences. And I'm thinking, when I do empathy work and I start to, I guess, relate emotionally to somebody and become emotive or emotional about somebody's situation, what it's telling me is that, biologically we're the same. If I'm getting the same kind of responses, whether it's sadness or joy, for example, that somebody has when they're telling their story, that's telling me that, yeah, they're different to me in some ways, but also they're really similar to me. And I think for me, that's I believe in designing for emotions. And the first time you come across emotions in the design process, if you're starting with an open-ended design challenge, is the first time you come across those emotions is when you embark on an effort to understand people and to empathize with them.
Mm. So I have a couple of questions for you there. One is around, so there is this mindset that emotions don't have a place in work, or this mindset that when we're solving problems or coming up with solutions, there's no place for emotions in there, like it needs to be factual. And what are your thoughts on that?
So I think there is a place for both facts or logic and emotion, and maybe ultimately that's what I find appealing about design, is it combines, if you like, this is a really short-handed way of saying it, but it combines art and science, the art of relating to understanding, and like I said, designing for emotions, and the science of gathering, I guess, maybe more tangible factual evidence that a problem exists and that you've gone some way to solving it. But yeah, I think there has to be a place for emotions, both at work and in the work we're doing, because ultimately, so especially when you're designing a service, maybe a product, although I've got no experience of that, but when you're designing a service, I think ultimately you're, well, let's use, say, the old restaurant or coffee shop example. So if you're designing a coffee shop, maybe the kind of logical thing you're designing for is designing to get somebody's coffee to them at the right temperature, obviously the right kind of coffee. Like the customer walks into the coffee shop, they order a coffee, and the job of the service is to have them be served their coffee within an appropriate, maybe measurable time frame. The coffee's the right coffee, the coffee's the right temperature. Then there's definitely for me a kind of an emotional aspect to that, because let's say the time taken to deliver the coffee to the person, if it's too long, they're going to experience the emotion of like frustration, disappointment, anger, maybe. The coffee is the wrong temperature, maybe, whether it's let's say it's too hot and unexpectedly hot, or they're going to experience the sensation of pain we're then going to experience the emotion of anger probably. Let's flip it around and talk about a positive. So somebody orders a coffee and it's the most delicious coffee they've ever had, then the sensation is taste, and it's going to be positive, but the emotion is maybe joy or certainly delight. And each of those three things, we can use design thinking to design each of those three aspects of that service or that experience. And that's, we haven't even started on, well, what color is the coffee shop inside? What's the tiles? How does somebody greet the person arriving into the coffee shop? All of that stuff. So hopefully I've kind of answered your question. So the short answer is absolutely. And I think for me anyway, it's always helpful to remember that ultimately you're designing for people's emotional response to something.
I think I would summarize that as saying, while as humans we love to believe that we are rational, logical people, most of life we go through using our emotional responses. It is to any stimuli we're exposed to, an emotional response is the first thing that happens. We are logical and we're very analytical, but that comes later.
Yeah. Okay.
Our initial experience to everything is, the initial experience is always an emotional one, and then the logic comes in, right? So I think the idea that, so that's one. And then two, I think the idea that we need to separate emotions from our work, it's like short of a lobotomy. I don't know how we can, it's just not.
Well, yeah. Okay, nice. Again, we're human beings. So nice summary.
Yeah. So I think your example of the coffee shop and how you think about it kind of illustrates that couple of sentences I just said. And yeah, I just think we have to be mindful of that emotions show up in everything. Okay, so far we've talked about what empathy is. We've talked about why it's important. Then we kind of delved into a little bit about emotions and its relationship to empathy, and why we need to pay attention to emotions. And I think the question that you raised that we never got to, that we hadn't got to yet, is around what are some simple things we can do to try to build empathy?
Okay.
What are your thoughts, Pete?
I like what you did there. I asked you the question, you kind of took it, held on to it, and instead of answering, you passed it back to me. Okay. So I'll start, and I'll give you time to think of a couple that you might have. I mean, the work I do in big organizations and people who are just kind of starting to learn design thinking, usually people approach me and say, I'd like to do some empathy interviews. And I think often that is a great place to start. And by empathy interviews, it's kind of a shorthand for, we want to have a conversation with the people we're interested in helping, that we're designing for or designing with. And those conversations are designed, and we put them together in order for us to build empathy with that person. So we'll I think of it as it's not like a survey questionnaire. It's not like a conversation you're going to have with your friends over dinner. It's something different. What we're doing is creating some questions and looking for stories to, and some of the stories kind of belong or sit below the surface of somebody's initial response. So I think of, an empathy conversation, you kind of structure it. It's tempting when you work in an organization, especially if you're embarking on a design project, to try and solve a problem with an existing product. It's tempting to go, well, tell me what's wrong with, let's say, your broadband, or tell me what's wrong with your your credit card experience, or tell me what's wrong with your Zoom call user experience. That, I think, for me anyway, that is kind of part of an initial empathy conversation, if that's what you're trying to solve for. But that's way down the line. I think there's a simple kind of 3-step thing, and I'd be keen to, you can tell me what you think of this, but I think initially understand the person, try and understand that person, then understand the problem or problems, and that's general problems in their life, and then thirdly, perhaps get to the product. So person, problems, and then product. And by product, I mean in this, the broadband, the credit card, or the or the Zoom experience. Say. So empathy interviews is a good first one. What about you?
I quite like to recommend to people that they do some empathy work within themselves before they start doing empathy interviews, because I think you kind of need a little bit of a warmer. So there's 2 things that I recommend. One is, and this is a really silly exercise, so I fully expect you to laugh and think it's crazy, but I've gotten feedback on it that people really find it useful. It's actually to try to understand what a situation is like from the point of view of an inanimate object. So let's say you're at dinner, and you try to imagine what the dinner experience was like if you were the water glass on the table.
Hey.
And it's just, and I know, I see you smiling. It is a bit of a silly exercise, but it starts to get you to start shifting your lens and going, because we're so used to and so comfortable with seeing the world through the lens that we see it, right? Our 2 eyes. And we do it without much conscious thought. So everything we see, we think, oh, this must be what it's like. So this is just a good exercise to just get people to go, to remember to pause and go, what might this be like if I wasn't the person? Yeah. The other exercise that I have people do often is, find a TV show where the main character is somebody completely opposite of you. And then watch that character and you only have to watch a couple of episodes, but watch what their life is like. So for me, I'm a married working professional without children. So I might opt to find a TV show of a stay-at-home mom, right? And observe, what are my mornings like? How are my mornings different to their mornings? What are their bedtime routines like? How is it different to my own? So it's just starting to, and that's, those are little things we can do to start building our empathy muscle.
I really love both of those ideas. The first one, for a few different reasons, is a bit weird. I like weird ideas. I also think it really brings to life that empathy, I guess ultimately it is about shifting your perspective. And I like what you talked about. It's like building a muscle. The more you practice it, the better you get at it, and the more able and quickly you're able to go, leave my perspective behind temporarily, and start to see things from somebody else's point of view. The other reason I like that inanimate objects is, and listeners will have realised or start to realise, I kind of like words and definitions of things. And I read somewhere in a book about emotions that empathy is actually a relatively recent word, according to the book I read, which created in the Victorian era by 2 two women who traveled around Europe, and they went into churches and cathedrals and different places and held on to inanimate objects and tried to sense what it was like to be that object. So they would walk into churches and hold on to statues, or go into museums and hold on to vases. The word for what they were doing was a Greek word, sounded like empath, and then eventually this word empathy emerged from the work they're doing. I'm sure there must be more to the word empathy than that, but I love that story and bringing it back to the water jug on the table. The whole, and that's another nice summary of what we're trying to do with empathy, is just shift our perspective. And nice reminder that it is a muscle. Do you find if you don't do this kind of work, or you haven't done any for a while, do you find that it takes a while to warm up again and kind of tune back into your ability to empathize?
Absolutely. Because I think, our brains are quite lazy for the most part. And then that's probably not a fair thing to say. I mean, our brains have a lot of responsibility. So it likes to be quite efficient, right?
Yeah.
This is the whole reason, like, we make very snap judgments about a lot of things, because our brains are trying to conserve energy.
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy in our busy lives to kind of get set in your perspective, see the world through your eyes. And when we're in that mode, we miss so much about what's happening with other people. So unless you're very consciously and mindfully doing things to go, okay, let me slow down and see this from this person's perspective, or see this from that person's perspective, it becomes very easy to not be empathetic. And to be clear, that doesn't mean that you're a bad person or you're mean, or, it doesn't mean any of those things. It just means that we're very good at being efficient. Our brains are very good at gearing us towards efficiency. And if you think about, the purpose of our brain is to keep us alive. It's basically to keep us safe and keep us alive. It's not worried about keeping us happy, or, it's not worried about any of those things, right? So until we slow our brains down and go, look, the tiger isn't chasing me, I can take a minute here. It'll be all right. And we really are mindful about, am I being empathetic in this situation? And taking time to really exercise those muscles, it becomes very easy. And I find myself in that all the time, particularly if I go through long periods of time where I'm not doing design work. That muscle just fades away.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so it is a bit like doing exercise or going to the gym. If you haven't done it for a while, then you might need to ease back into it. And you've given us a couple of things that we can do. Nice. And also a nice reminder that we're human, so give yourself a break if you're finding yourself not automatically getting back into it straight away, or even doing it for the first time. It was taking a while for you to click and build some empathy.
I actually had this happen to me. I was doing a piece of work where we were doing empathy interviews, and I had taken a break from work, and I hadn't done one in a while. And I actually I had started the empathy interview, and I had to say to the person, I'm really sorry, I need to stop, because I started to notice I was basically just going through the motions of it, but I wasn't actually doing the empathy work.
Okay.
And I told her I just need a few minutes.
Okay.
And I took a break, and I literally went, off to the side, and I'm sure they thought, what is going on with this person? But I needed to, so I'm sharing this to be, on the back of your comment around being human, is that even those of us that practice this regularly, we're human too, and we slip, and sometimes we have to refocus our own muscles.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that, Dani. every time I start on this, I get the same kind of beginner's nerves, because with a piece of empathy work, I guess both nerves of excitement, because you really never know what you're going to find out. It's always something amazing that you will discover about other people's lives, like truly amazing. I think maybe that's what keeps me going, is you just never always amazed, even if it's something that, looking back on it, seems really obvious that was just hidden in plain sight about somebody else's life. There's always something to learn about, the breadth and diversity of human lives and human perspectives. So you have those nerves of excitement, and sometimes those nerves of slight anxiety about, am I going to upset this person or offend this person? I'm talking about kind of empathy interviews again at the moment. So yeah, if anybody out there feels that, I think it's pretty normal. It's part of being human. But ultimately, it's about being curious about other human beings and starting to relate to them in a stronger way. Okay.
So let's see, we've talked about what empathy is, why it's important, the role of emotions in empathy. We've talked about some ways that we can develop our empathy muscle. So what does all this mean?
What does it all mean for me? I think, like I said at the beginning, empathy is a short word, a big subject, and we've only really started to touch on it. But I heard once somebody be asked what the superpower of design and designers is, and I think it's this: it is empathy, and it is the ability to, and having a process or an approach to slow down, be curious, and repeatedly, consistently understand other people significantly better. That's what it means for me.
I'm going to add two things to that, because it means all of those things to me. And I think it's, we do it in service of.
Yeah.
And I lost my train of thought there.
Well, that's understandable. We've been talking pretty deeply for a while.
I think for me, the other thing, sorry, now I remember, I think being curious and practicing being curious on a consistent basis. Speaking of curiosity, little George here, who's my 10-week-old puppy, is trying to chime into the conversation, Pete.
Well, welcome to the conversation, George.
He is probably the definition of curiosity at the moment.
Yeah. Nice. And how about any takeaways from this week's conversation for you, Dani?
The thing I'm going to take away from this conversation is I really like the story that you said about the where the word empathy came from. So I want to go do a little bit of reading from about the roots of empathy.
Cool. Nice. For me, well, I'm going to take your gift, since you've accepted one for me, the gift of sitting at the dinner table this evening, and starting with imagining things from the jug of water, but there's another couple of human beings that sit around the dinner table with me, and I'll maybe see where my mind goes to when I start and imagine it from my partner's eyes, or my 4-year-old daughter's eyes. So thanks for that weird but very inspiring game to play. Thanks, Dani.
You're welcome. All right. I think that does it for our episode. We look forward to seeing you next week when we do episode 5.
Episode 5. Yeah, I can't wait.
All right. Till next week. Bye, Pete.
Bye, Dani. Bye, everyone. See you next time.